May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be ever mindful of thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Well, I hope you've not been too put out by the hurricane warnings. As of the filming right now, this morning, it looks like it's all going to be off the coast of the Atlantic, but you never know with these things. They can turn on a dime, so hopefully it'll be a clear day ahead. I want to talk to you this morning about our reading from Genesis, and I want to talk to you about what you need to do in order to be fully possessed of the power of God. Now that's a big order. That's a tall story. I mean, how does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen all at once. But as the Apostle Paul tells us, these stories in the Old Testament, they recount what actually happened, but they also recount things that are of value to us spiritually. We learn from them. The story of the patriarchs and of David and Moses and all of this and that are not just entertaining legends and myths from the past. They have deep spiritual meaning for those whose hearts and eyes are open to hear and see them. Now, this particular passage of Jacob wrestling with God has had all sorts of interpretations in recent years. But I still am satisfied with what I guess is the traditional understanding. Now, the German reformer Martin Luther said this was one of the most argued over passages in the Old Testament. So please don't hear me to say my view is the only view and everybody else is wrong. Rather, my feeling, my sense, my understanding of the power of God leads me to support the view that I'm going to share with you. The story opens with Jacob just about to return to the promised land. He's been gone for 20 years. He fled his family home to go to his uncle Laban's after he tricked his brother Esau. And while he was at Uncle Laban's house, he fell in love with Rachel, and he worked 7 years to have Rachel as his wife. But then Laban tricked him and gave him Rachel's plain older sister Leah as his wife. And Jacob had to work another 7 years to have Rachel become his wife as well. But in those 14 years and the 6 years that followed, Jacob did pretty well for himself. His Uncle Laban was just like Jacob. He was a schemer. He was a bit tricky. He was sort of oily. And Jacob was as well. Jacob was a trickster. Jacob was a deceiver. He did it to his brother. He did it to his father. He did it to his Uncle Laban. Well, Jacob has now sort of burnt his bridges at home with Laban, and he's returning. Now, 20 years earlier, all he had with him was a walking stick when he crossed over into the land of Aram, where his uncle lived. Now he's come back with 2 wives, 2 concubines, 11 children, and lots of donkeys and asses and camels and sheep. He's a wealthy man. He's done well for himself. Maybe not always on the up and up, but he's done pretty good. And behind him, he has Uncle Laban, who's not particularly happy, so he's got to go. Ahead of him, he's learned that his brother Esau has 400 men with him and is looking for him. And it's going to be trouble. Jacob can't really think of what to do, what ploy to do. If I divide up my households in 2, so that if I do get attacked, I won't lose everything. That's his plan. And then he says, well, if I can put forward so many sheep and so many gifts and basically bribe my way out of this, maybe that'll do it. But it's now nighttime, and Jacob stands on the borders at the ford of Jabbok, just about to enter into Israel. And here's our story takes up. Jacob got up at night, took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. Okay, Jacob was left alone. That's where we come to right now. He's in the same position he was 20 years earlier, alone and with nothing. 20 years earlier, he had nothing. Now he's got a lot of stuff. But he sent them away in hiding. Jacob is alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Wait, I thought he was alone. It doesn't say Jacob was alone, but a man came along who wrestled with him. Jacob was still alone, and a man wrestled with him. Now, what does this tell us? This is like Jacob's dream that I spoke of a few weeks ago, where he saw angels ascending and descending a stairway to heaven. Here, Jacob is having an experience, a mystical experience. He's by himself, and he's wrestling with a man. And he wrestles all night. He struggles, he fights, and morning is about to come. And the man with whom he's wrestling says, I must go, morning is coming. Tell me your name. I won't tell you my name. And the man with whom he is wrestling touches the hip and puts it out of joint. And the contest is over, but Jacob still holds on. Jacob gives in after fighting all night. And once he gives in, the stranger says to him, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is that you ask me my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel. And now Jacob was called Israel. His name changed from Jacob to Israel, and that's where the name of the country comes from, and that's why we call them Israelites. Jacob had a conversion experience. Now, some people read this to say that if you continue the fight, if you persevere in prayer, eventually you're going to wear God out. And we have a story from the Old Testament that some people like to point to, where there's a widow, and Jesus tells a parable about this widow who goes to court and the judge won't hear her case. He's a corrupt judge. He can't be bothered. She hasn't paid a bribe. She hasn't slipped a few dollars to the bailiff to get on the docket. But she goes every day, and she goes to his house and she follows him around and, give me justice, give me justice. She nags and she nags and she nags, and finally the judge, unjust judge, gives in and says, okay, I'll hear your case. And they say, well, maybe that's the same thing here. That if you fight, if you persevere in prayers, if you keep going, put your nose to the grindstone, God will eventually give in and grant you your prayers. The problem is, Jesus was saying God, our Father, is not like the unjust judge. And to say that Jacob finally got the better of God and finally wore him out is sort of defeated by God just by the prick of his hands. Touching his thigh, it's over. And once the battle's over, when Jacob, all he can do because he's in pain and he's got nothing left to fight with, he holds on and is empty of struggle. At that moment, God comes into him and speaks and gives him a blessing and gives him a new name. Friends, what I hear in this passage is that you cannot struggle and fight with God and expect to beat God, to beat him down, that by your prayers, if you climb up to this shrine on your knees, if you beat yourself over your head, if you say so many Hail Marys, if you do this and this and this and this, God will finally say, okay, you're at 99 rosary beads. Now that you've got 100, oh, now you've got it. No, I don't think it's got anything to do with that. That you can't fight your way or earn your way or work your way. You've got to give in and empty yourself of yourself to allow the power of God to come into you. Friends, you can't put more, if you've got a pot that's full, you can't keep pouring more water into it. It'll spill out. Sometimes you have to empty it out to take in more things. And the human soul is like that. You've got to give God elbow room in your life and your heart so that he can work in your life and in your mind and your soul. See, Jacob, as we read the earlier passages here, he prays, then he schemes. He prays, then he schemes. I'm going to ask God for this, but I'm really going to count on my own being clever, of dividing my forces, of going into the mountains, going to bribe Esau. And what he has to do is he has to have that experience that he's finally reached the point where he cannot go on any longer, and he just says, God, I give it to you. And then the power of God comes into him. Oh, friends, this has been true of my life so many times. I fight and I struggle and I plan and I think this is how I'm going to do it and this is what I'm going to do. And I get all worked up and I go. And I say, okay, God, bless what I'm going to do. Catch up with me. And when it doesn't work, I ask myself, what went wrong? Well, it's because I didn't start with God. I started with myself. I didn't put God in the center of my life. I put myself and my own strength and my own might and my own intelligence in the center, as Jacob has done all his life. And only when I put God there and I step back so that he can step in, can I truly be fulfilled. It's a funny little thing. And Jesus says this, for those to gain their lives, they must first lose it. This is what Jesus is talking about. To fully access the power of God, you've got to be willing to give it all away and give it up. Jesus again and again makes this point, and we see this point worked out here in the life of Jacob. Only when Jacob is willing to say, Uncle, not Uncle Laban, but where he's willing to say, I can't go on. I'm going to trust in you. All I can do is I'm in pain. My hip is broken. All I can do is hold on and trust that you're not going to hurt me. At that point, when you stop fighting and scheming and thinking and begin trusting in God, will you truly see the power of God? Friends, there's a fancy word for this. The Eastern Orthodox like to talk about this a great deal. We also use it when we talk about Jesus, kenosis, emptying yourselves. Some people like to think that when Christ took human form, when he was born of a virgin, he was fully God, but he limited his godliness, emptying himself. Well, that's a difficult topic I don't want to get into. But the human side is something I truly believe in. We have to empty ourselves of our pride, of our ego. We have to allow God to fill us. And that's the only way that we can become who we truly are. It's when you tear down all the defenses, pull down all the walls, can you truly see what lies within. Trust in God. Don't fight him. Open your heart to his love and allow it to carry you forward in life. Amen.